Hello, everybody. I hope everyone's doing good today. My name is Zach. I am the email manager at ID Tech. ID Tech is a STEM education company. We do summer camps and online learning camps for kids age 7 to 19. I'm really happy to be here today to show you some advanced interactive coding concepts. Specifically, we're going to go start to finish from coding an interactive module, and I'm hopefully going to give you some great tips and tricks along the way that you can take with you and make your own awesome creations. So let's go ahead and dive in. First, let's get a little primer on what interactive email coding is. About a decade ago, Mark Robbins noticed a trick online that he decided to try to apply to his email templates, and that was using input elements like checkboxes and radio elements to give us a state-like event, like a toggle, and then we can attach interactions to that. So when you toggle those inputs, something on screen will happen. You can see on the right here some examples that I've pulled from reallygoodemails.com. So those are all running on the same basic technology. It's nothing special. It's not AMP. It's not anything proprietary. It's just really creative CSS. So one of the big questions with interactive email is where it can be used. There are some requirements needed to make the coding work, and they're listed up at the top there. Our inboxes need to be able to support the checked pseudo-class attribute, as well as the display none style, and then style tags up in the header of the email. So that covers a lot. And they must also be able to support the for pseudo class or the appearance CSS style, and those are sort of interchangeable. And we'll go into detail a little bit later about how those relate. Optionally, things like hover, animations, and transitions, other CSS fun stuff is great to have, but not necessary for the interactions themselves to work. So we've got support in all Apple inboxes. That gives us about 50% market share. And then we can include Yahoo, Outlook.com, as well as Outlook on all the mobile devices, and Samsung Mail, and the AOL web and app. And then that leaves the inboxes that we can't use interactive email on. That includes Gmail, our dear friend and enemy Outlook on Windows, and then some of the more obscure inboxes in other countries. You can see some notes down there. Gmail does support hover. Um, all Gmail except for non-Gmail accounts in iOS, so I guess that would be called Ginga. They support the form submission fallback, and we'll talk about that at the end of the presentation. And of course, if you're approved to work with AMP through Google, you can also just use a AMP alternative in Gmail if you'd like to. Outlook, we don't really need to talk about. They are almost done supporting those word-based inboxes, so hopefully we don't have to think about them soon, but they definitely do not support interaction. And then some of these inboxes actually do support checked over on the right. GMX iOS, WebDE iOS, and Thunderbird iOS all support the checked pseudo class, but unfortunately, as far as I know, and as far as I can find in the resources I know, there's no way to target those inboxes specifically to show or not show the interactive module. So they will get the fallback as well. All right, so today what we are building is what I like to call a product recommendation engine. You have users select options with the inputs, and then there's a results area at the bottom that gives you the result based on what options they've checked. So you can see on the right there, we've got we've got animal type, dog and cat, we've got their temperament and their size, and depending on what the user chooses, you can see that the results at the bottom are different. So there's a lot that goes into this, and especially when we're talking about inbox support. So let's go ahead and dive into that. When we're doing an interactive email, there's a really simple structure that you start with. You have a wrapper. The wrapper typically, for me, I always put an inline display none on the wrapper for the interactive module because I like to start from a non-interactive fallback that's going to show in all inboxes, and then I display it on the inboxes that I know it's going to work in on a case-by-case basis. So that way everyone gets the fallback except for who I say. So in a real life application, the wrapper is going to have a display none inline that also supports inboxes that don't support the style tag. So it's pretty foolproof. And then you have right inside the wrapper input elements. Typically, it's going to be a radio or a checkbox button. Today, we're going to be working with radios for our quiz. And then below that, we have a little wrapper for our feedback results. And then inside of that is where the results go that we show based on the interactions above. So then you can see we add our CSS style to the code. And we start getting some interactivity here. You'll notice I have IDs and classes all throughout the code here. They're nothing special. You can use whatever naming schema works best for you. So let's head into the code real quick so you can see what we're looking at. So this was our basic layout without CSS. This gives you two radio buttons and they do nothing. So you have two radio buttons, you have a sort of placeholder message, and then you have your results here. So you can see that in the code on the left. This is where we've added our styles in the slide I was just showing you. So we have our targeting here to target our results options, which are down at the bottom, and input option pet type dog checked. We do a sibling selector to look for the feedback results, and then inside of that we have result pet type dog. So you can see down here result pet type dog, and that will show when input option pet type dog is checked. So you can see that over on the right hand side we've got two inputs, and when we check them we get a cat result and a dog result. So that is our basic interactive formula that you would use even for the most complex things like building out inside email shopping carts and complex carousels and things like that. All right, so we've got a simple interactive structure. So to add on to that, so that we can make things look a little better and we don't have to have just raw radio and checkbox elements in our email, typically you would add a label element. And with a label element, you link it to the input element with the for attribute. You can see highlighted there in yellow. And that allows us to click on the label and it will interact with the state of the input, regardless of where it is inside the document. So we've gone ahead and added, we have our two inputs here at the top, and then we've got labels. We've nested them in this case inside of an options wrapper. And we have the four elements here, which links to the ID elements up here. And in our rendered HTML, you can see that when we click on the labels, it activates the radio buttons and gives us our show hide results down at the bottom. So that's your typical setup for a label and input situation. However, email always comes with caveats and quirks, and unfortunately, the connection between the for and the ID of those elements does not work in Outlook.com, and it does not work in Yahoo or AOL for various reasons. So you could stop here and you could say, well, they don't work, so I'm just going to go ahead and forgo those inboxes. It's not a huge market share. I'm just going to support essentially Apple. But there are some tricks we can use and some not very complex CSS, just a couple lines of CSS, a couple lines of HTML that will get this working in both of these inboxes. And then you get to say the sentence, I made an interactive email that works in Outlook. You don't have to say the .com part, but they don't know that. You can say it works in Outlook. All right, so we've decided for this presentation to support as many inboxes as possible. It's sort of one of my obsessions as an email coder. Even at the most obscure inbox, I'm going to try to support as much as I can in every template I build. So that was my goal here, was maximum inbox support. One thing that's interesting is the fix that works for Yahoo and AOL, we can also use for Apple, so we don't actually have to have like a fallback or a different thing for those inboxes. We can use the same thing we use for the Apple inboxes there. And then for Outlook Online, or excuse me, Outlook.com specifically, we can use the same label elements that we'll be using for our possible Gmail fallback at the end. So that will make a little bit more sense as we get further into this. But essentially, you don't need to have five, six, seven different fallbacks. You can just have one fallback and one interactive and a couple lines of CSS and HTML to get you to higher inbox support. Okay, so let's talk about these quirks in Outlook and Yahoo and AOL and just get familiar with what they do. So in Outlook, when you send an input in a label, you can see the blue is what we've sent. We gave it an ID and a name and a value, and then we gave the label a 4 with that matches the ID of the input. Outlook prefixes a bunch of things with X underscore. They don't, however, prefix the value of the 4 label, excuse me, the 4 attribute in the label. So you can see in the second image there, we get an X on the ID, we get an X on the name of the input, but in the label, it's just exactly what we put, thing one on dash input. So by default, that connection is broken. So if we click on the label in this instance, the input is not going to be activated. They're no longer connected. So we can fix this sort of a rudimentary way. We just add the X underscore to the 4 attribute in our label, and Outlook will match them up because it doesn't do that automatically. Unfortunately, if we do that, it's going to break the connection to the label in all the other inboxes that don't put the prefix X. So our solution to this problem is a second label. We're going to call it a ghost label, and you just add it right after the first label, and you give it a different ID and a different class. So you can see that the first label we have regular label as the class, second label we have ghost label as the class, and then we have ID label pet type dog regular, label pet type dog ghost. So on Outlook.com, we'll hide the regular label and we will show the ghost label, and therefore our connection will be unbroken and our interaction will work. So that's the only little extra piece of HTML we need to add in this whole demonstration to make this work in all of our inboxes. There's a little bit of CSS later, but this is the only extra thing, just this one little label element. So your structure will be input, label, label, all in that order right after each other for each of your inputs. Okay. So another issue we have in Outlook.com is that the checked attribute or pseudo selector only works on type selectors. And specifically what that means is you can't put it on something with like referenced by a class or an ID. So if it's an input colon checked, that'll work. But input with an ID option pet type dog colon checked, that's not going to work. And it's not going to work with a class either. It has to be a bare type selector, and in our case, a bare input. So what we do is what I call the sibling selector trick. We use the ID of the direct next sibling, which is in our case the regular label, to identify the input you want to work with. If we do input plus label pet type dog regular, which is our label, that gives us a selector that's only going to work on that input. So whenever we do a checked situation, we want to make sure that we're using the raw input. So only input, no classes, no IDs on those, or it's not going to work in Outlook.com. Okay, so AOL and Yahoo have a different set of issues when it comes to the label. They also do prefixing in their messages, but it's not predictable. It's not X underscore every time like it is for Outlook. It's actually just a random string of characters, 1, 2, 3, ZXY is what I put in there. So we can't do the same trick as we can in Outlook where we just prefix it with what they prefix it with because we don't know what that prefix is going to be. So this leaves us with a little bit of a conundrum. In Yahoo, we can connect the label to the input if we remove the 4 attribute from the label and we wrap the input with the label. So you can see in the very bottom demonstration there. That's how you make them connect in Yahoo. But unfortunately, when you wrap the input, you can no longer do sibling selectors to go find your other content in your template. I've seen a lot of tricks done where you do a lot of like label nesting. So there's just this crazy sort of nested system of labels, and that's a way to go if that's what you're used to, what you've done. But to me, it's a little bit too unsemantic to for me to go that route. So I needed to find a better solution. And I indeed did find a better solution in a CSS attribute known as the appearance attribute. So the appearance attribute is sort of new in the sense that it wasn't supported by main browsers until about 2022. But you can find documentation for it online, and it does work now in all major browsers. Essentially, what it does is it tells the browser that on this input element, don't do any of your default styling, and in fact, just give me a blank space in the place where this input normally would be. In the case of a checkbox on a radio, it just makes it disappear, almost like you did a display none, except it's not display none, it's appearance none. And then a side note for AOL and possibly Yahoo, my testing is a little inconclusive, but for AOL, for sure, you need to use WebKit appearance none instead of appearance none. So being able to directly style the input kind of opens up a new world of possibilities because we no longer have to use the label to create nice looking buttons or interfaces in order to control the inputs. We can actually just take the input and directly style it and make that our button, and the label doesn't even need to be in the picture. For some of our inboxes that don't support the appearance attribute, we will use the label instead. But for Apple, Yahoo, and AOL, which all support appearance, we will just use direct styles on the input, forgo all of the label complication, and use the input instead. And it will make styling easier and give us that inbox support we are looking for. As of this presentation date, caniemail.com doesn't have the appearance attribute on it. I've actually gone in and requested they add it for us so that as we're all doing our cool interactive emails, we can reference it and see what's in which inboxes it's supported on. There is a caveat with appearance none. There's no way to add live text to the styles of that element. So, in a regular CSS world, in a web dev world, you could use like the before or the after and put some content in there and style it. Unfortunately, before and after is not well supported. It is supported in Apple, but it's not supported in AOL Yahoo, so you couldn't use that solution in order to put live text into those buttons or interface pieces with appearance none. So if you want to put text into those like we did with our buttons, you'll have to do something like sprites. And for those who don't know what sprites are, travel back in time with me about 20 years to the early days of web dev. This was often how we would do sort of transitioned interactions on early websites. Basically, it's a background image. And you set the background position on it so that only part of the image displays. And then when you interact with that element, we change the background position to the other part of the image, and then it changes the background, or honestly, whatever you'd like. It's an image, so it can be anything you want in these sprites. But that's the main bottom line with sprites is it's a background image, and you change the position in order for it to have a new state when it's checked or unchecked. Okay, so with Outlook.com, like I said, there's no appearance support on that inbox. So what we'll do is we'll hide the input on inbox, so we won't see the radio input. We'll hide the regular label that we're going to use for a couple other inboxes, and we'll show the ghost label, which will be successfully connected to the radio button, and we'll use that for our interaction. Okay, so if we go to our next example here, this is what it's going to look like at this state when we have both of our inputs, both of our ghost and regular inputs. You basically have two labels, dog and cat. The second one will not work because we've put that X underscore in them for Outlook. So these are only ever going to work inside Outlook.com inbox. All right, so bringing it all together, just as a summary of what we've done so far, we're using radio input elements as direct children of our interactive wrapper. We're using appearance none in Apple, Yahoo, and AOL. We are showing styled elements and hiding the inputs where appearance none does not work, which is Outlook inbox plus Samsung. And then we're going to include the two regular elements, a regular and a ghost, which I just explained will be used in Outlook.com. And then our CSS, we're always going to start our selections with input colon checked with no classes or IDs to make sure that our checked functionality works in Outlook.com. Okay, so essentially at this point, you basically just rinse and repeat. You just create as many inputs as you want, and then you create as many results as you want, giving them the unique classes that are going to match up to the inputs in your selectors. Once you get the selectors figured out, you just copy paste and then you just replace like the word dog and type with cat and type, or size and small with size and medium, etc. You can see at the bottom there sort of the complexity of this selector. So just for fun, I'll read it out for you. So in this selector, find an input that is checked with an immediate next sibling with the ID label pet type dog regular label, and then find a sibling label that is also checked and has an immediate next sibling with the ID label pet size small regular, and then find a sibling with the class feedback results and look inside for the class pet type dog pet size small and show it. So that gets us from the input at the top of the document all the way down into the feedback results and the specific result that we want to show. So you just do that over and over again until you have all the inputs and all the options that you want. And eventually you will get something like this. This one just has two options, of course. But so this is the styled inputs using appearance none. I don't have the sprites animated, which is why they're not doing the cool up and down thing. It's just a quick background position shift here with no animation. And then we get our results. So you can imagine you would just copy this code for as many rows as you want, and then copy this code down here for as many results as you want. Now, if we go over to the code, I'm going to explain a couple things for you. This is all just sort of visual styles up here at the top, hiding our results by default. This is our appearance styles for the inputs for Apple, Yahoo, AOL. And then I have the sprites applied themselves. So input option pet type dog, we've got a background image sprite dog.png, and then we've got that for the other buttons. These are actually buttons that are not currently in the email over here, so pardon those extra ones. We handle the sprite position background unchecked here. And then we get into a little bit of inbox support. So in Outlook webmail, iOS and Android, we use the regular label and we hide the inputs. We do this because Outlook in iOS, Android, and Mac, that should actually say Mac here as well, I believe, uh, don't need the extra X underscore attribute. That only happens in Outlook.com webmail. So in those inboxes, we're going to use the regular label because the for will work on the input by default, and the attribute, the appearance attribute doesn't work in those inboxes. So we'll use that regular label for those. We have our targeting in place for those using how to target. On Outlook for Mac, oh, I was incorrect about Mac. Sorry about that. On Outlook for Mac, we show the regular label as well. So it's the same styles. We're just targeting Outlook on Mac here. In Outlook Webmail, we show the ghost label instead, which reconnects the for pseudo class, and we hide the regular label, and the inputs are already hidden because they're wrapped in up here. This also applies to Webmail. And then on Samsung Mail, we also use the regular labels and hide the inputs and ghost labels because for some reason in Samsung Mail, the sprites don't seem to work or behave very well, although that could be something to experiment with. There's a little more work to be done on that front. So continuing on in our CSS, so we've applied our checked styles to the regular and the ghost labels. You can't see those being applied on the right here. These are actually the styled inputs using the appearance none styles. But in the inboxes where we need to use the labels, we've gone ahead and given it a background color of a dark gray when they're checked. But the targeting is pretty simple. You just do input checked plus label. So that's going to give you the direct neighbor for the regular label. And then input checked plus label is going to target the ghost label, which is, of course, right after the regular label. So you can keep those styles synced with just one CSS rule there. Okay, so building the default progress message. So this is going to be the message that appears before any selections are made. So if you wanted to hide when at least one option is checked from each of your different rows or groups, you would do that with the method on the left. If you want to hide it with when any option is checked, you just do a simple rule of input checked and then you hide it. And if you want to hide instructions when at least one of the first row is checked, you would use that rule on the bottom left. So it's about when you want the instructions or progress of the results to show and hide. So if we go back into our code here, we can see that, let me refresh this. If you click on dog, we don't get a change down here with the placeholder, but then if we go ahead and select our second option, we get the result and the placeholder is hidden. So that's one way you can do it. And then if you want to do it through a progressive result, where if they select dog, you give them a message specific to just dog being selected. Same thing with cat. And you can see in our HTML, we have progress message default, progress message dog, progress message cat, and then they all have the class of just progress message. So if we go up to that CSS, the show dog cat message when only dog cat is selected. So you do input checked for the dog type, and then you say display block, display block on just the dog type, and same thing with the cat. So you can do progressive messaging. You can wait till all the selections are made to show the results. You can do a mix of both. You can get really flexible with how you show and hide these things based on the selectors that you use. So Gmail, we mentioned Gmail a little earlier. I love this quote from Mark Robbins from one of his talks on interactive email. Outlook uses Word as a rendering engine, which is stupid and annoying, but Gmail is worse. And he is correct. Um, and it's almost worse because Gmail is a modern tech brand. You'd think they'd be able to get in line with what Apple's doing with their inboxes. But I have my conspiracy theories on why they don't support some of these things. But yeah, Gmail is the hardest to support. It does not work, or this interactive email stuff does not work there, so we have to come up with alternatives. One alternative you can think of if you don't want to just show a fallback in Gmail is an interactive, actually submittable live form. It's pretty easy to turn what we just did into a live form. You just wrap it in a form element and give it a URL and method equal get, and then you put a button at the bottom, and then they will fill out the form, or in our case, they'll just select the radio buttons and then click the submit button, and you would take them to your website with the parameters of that form in the URL. And based on what's in the URL, you would show them content on the page. If you do have control of your website in a way where you can make this work, it is a pretty cool alternative because you can just send them over to your website and hopefully they convert that way. So when you're showing the fallbacks versus the interactive elements, you're going to want to use the how to target website to figure out how to show it on Apple, Yahoo, AOL, Samsung, all the outlooks. You want to make sure you target very carefully, but that is why I use the fallback default method because then you can't really show something weird or broken to an inbox unless you're specifically trying to show it on that inbox. So use this website. It has all the targeting you need to make what I just described work in the inboxes, that it should. Metrics for this stuff is tough, as it is for anything in email these days, honestly. Pixel tracking used to be a creative way you could do it, where you loaded pixels inside the show hide areas, but these days pixel tracking is frowned upon by most inboxes and doesn't really work because of proxy opens and privacy issues and things like that. So the best way to track is just to use UTMs. So if you're showing a product in that results section, just throw a UTM on the end of the URL with the options that applies to. And that way, if they go to your website and convert, you'll have the options that they chose in the email as part of the UTM parameter data. And you can use that to figure out, how people got there, what options they chose to get to that product, and maybe what's motivating them to buy that specific variation. In terms of how interactive emails do on our main KPIs. So open rates stay about the same. No one knows the email is interactive until it's open anyway. The actual raw clicks do tend to go down a little bit, about 10 to 20%. But the CVR goes up 10 to 20%. And the theory here is that people who are interacting with the email and then eventually click through to the website are actually warmer leads, and they're more likely to convert on the website than people who interacted in the email but didn't click through. Those people probably weren't going to convert anyway on the website, so that's why the CVR ends up going up in the end. So it does help with conversion. If you are looking for a click rate vanity metric, you're not going to get it from an interactive email, but I can promise you almost every time you'll get more people clicking through and purchasing than you did from a non-interactive email. And last but not least, your imagination is the limit with this stuff. The tools I've shown are very much like the baseline sort of toolkit, and you can apply it to a lot of different applications. This is a really, really cool one. Probably my favorite interactive email that I've ever seen from the brand 2UK, where you can build your little Christmas tree. You can change the types of lights. You can reset it, and then you can say "bah humbug," and it burns the whole thing down. Um, it's really fun. It's all just a bunch of checkboxes with GIFs as the background, essentially. You can sort of imagine the number of inputs that are inside this email. You can actually go on reallygoodemails.com and find this and see the code yourself. It's a it's a sight to behold, but it is very neat, and it just shows that the tricks and the stuff you can apply to make some really cool messaging. So, thank you so much for listening to my incredibly in the weeds advanced interactive email talk. I'm sure I missed some things. I'm sure I glossed over some details that you guys would have liked me to expand more on. I'll be here in the Slack thread to answer your questions. I always love talking about this stuff. I'm a nerd for email code, so if you ever just want to get a hold of me and chat about email code, you feel free to do so. Thanks so much, and you guys have a great rest of the day.